Hey guys, so I have had it in my mind to do a whole, even a series, but I wanted to do worst sequels, which we're doing today, best sequels, worst remakes, best remakes. I mean, there's just endless amounts of videos like that to do. So we're gonna do one of those today. Today we're gonna be talking about the worst horror sequels, and I wanna state that this entire video is completely my opinion, which is obvious. So if you disagree with me and you like some of these sequels, that's totally fine. Also, I want to point out that just because these movies are on this list doesn't mean I actually don't enjoy them. I actually own 4 of them on DVD, which might be confusing and hypocritical to put them in a worst sequel list if I actually own them, but 2 of them I only wanted to own for franchise purposes. So there are actually different reasons why some of these movies are on this list. There are 2 actually. 1 being that they're just bad movies in general, and 2 being that they just don't make sense as a sequel to their original movie. They're not necessarily bad movies, they're just not good follow-ups to the original movie. But before we get into the list, I just want to thank Shudder for sponsoring this video. Shudder is a premium streaming service from AMC Networks for all your thriller, horror, and suspense needs. You can stream completely ad-free on all of your devices, including Xbox One, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Google Chromecast for just $5.99 a month or $56.99 per year. They have the largest horror selection, from classics to blockbuster hits to exclusive and original content such as their new series called Cursed Films, which I am so excited to watch. It's a documentary series that is all about horror movies that are allegedly cursed, so it's a fun time. Also, this month of April, Shudder is celebrating halfway to Halloween the entire month, and I am so excited. I can't clap because of the mic will pick it up and it'll just be too loud, but I'm clapping on the inside. I'm so excited. It's halfway to Halloween, and I'm so excited for the content being posted to Shudder right now. They've added a bunch of new Halloween content, and since we're all on lockdown, I personally have decided to binge watch all of the Friday the 13th movies, which have just been uploaded to Shudder. Thank you, Shudder, for adding all of those movies on there. I surprisingly have not seen every single Friday movie, so I don't know if I can, legally call myself a Friday fan because I haven't seen them all. But now I will watch all of them because there's nothing better to do. So I think now would of course be a perfect time to start your 30-day free trial for Shudder. Just go to shudder.com and use my code POSSESSED30. Okay, so in no order at all, let's discuss my least favorite sequels. I'm gonna say least favorite instead of saying the worst horror sequels. Actually, the title's gonna remain that, but hope you understand. The Woman in Black, Angel of Death. First of all, I hate the title of this movie. Like, it's 2 titles smushed together to make it part of the Woman in Black series. There's 2 of them. I don't like it. I, of course, am obsessed with the first Woman in Black starring Daniel Radcliffe. Supernatural movies are my favorite subgenre of horror, and the atmosphere in that movie is just gorgeous. There are, of course, a lot of jump scares in that movie, but just in general, that type of horror and the essence and the atmosphere and everything that they put into that movie is just A+. So the sequel, Angel of Death, takes place 40 years after the original Woman in Black, around World War II time, and it follows a woman and a group of children who were evacuated from London. The tone of the sequel was just completely different to the original. It was no longer that like bleak and beautiful, haunting atmosphere. The set was still beautiful, of course, because the house was still a part of it, but it just wasn't the same kind of dreary, bleak atmosphere that it was in the original. Now, one of my theories of why this movie wasn't as good as the original is that the director of the sequel, Tom Harper, doesn't typically work on horror movies. And just in general, there were different people behind the sequel than the first. And I find that that's the case in a lot of sequels, specifically the ones that aren't as successful or aren't as good as the original. And a lot of people may argue that just generally sequels aren't as good as the original. A lot of people prefer original movies to sequels. I do have an argument as to why that's not always the case, but we'll talk about that in best sequels, I think, because there are examples of sequels that are actually better than the originals, at least in my opinion. Anyways, the 2 Woman in Black movies just don't seem that related. It doesn't really make sense as a sequel, even though timeline-wise and setting-wise it does. It just didn't feel like they were necessarily related. I don't think I'd mind the movie so much if it wasn't considered a sequel to the original. But of course, when you are a sequel to a movie, you're going to compare the two and see if it's actually holds up to the original. I do own Woman in Black 2 on DVD. I'm not really sure why or how I got it, to be honest, but I have it. Next up, we have Cabin Fever, Patient Zero. Oh, Cabin Fever. That's just such a love-hate, I think, with that series franchise. I don't know. I actually just watched Red Letter Media's review on Cabin Fever, which I found highly entertaining. They questioned whether or not it holds up in today's era, and it does not, and I think it's funny, so definitely go check that video out. So Cabin Fever is, of course, an over-the-top movie. The second one is also very over-the-top, and they're not serious horror films. You know, they don't take themselves too seriously. They're kind of gory just for gore's sake most of the time. You know, in plot, it doesn't make sense, some of the gore that they use, but it's still gross and disturbing. I think that's for shock value. But Patient Zero is just like offensive to me to call it a sequel to Cabin Fever, because at least Cabin Fever 1 and 2 have like an endearing quality. We know what we're getting into, and then Patient Zero just comes along and it is just so bad. And actually, the Cabin Fever remake that never should have happened might actually be the worst of the franchise, to be honest, but we'll save that for the worst remakes video. So Patient Zero follows a group of friends on a bachelor party cruise in the Caribbean and stumbles upon a remote island harboring a deadly flesh-eating virus. And this movie was actually meant to be shot back to back with yet another sequel. That's right, they were gonna make a fourth one, but that one was actually canceled in order to make the Cabin Fever remake, which I'm not sure what would have been worse. The Cabin Fever remake, that should never have happened, or a fourth Cabin Fever. Again, not that the first two movies were like works of art by any means, but in Patient Zero, you just don't care about the plot and the characters at all. It just felt so underdeveloped and messy, and it just feels like, what's the point? Like, why was this made? Because they could, probably. And I also don't think Eli Roth had any part in this sequel. I don't even think he had a part in the second one, which arguably was worse than the first one as well, but still has some of the essence of Cabin Fever that we like. Generally, Eli Roth movies are very hit or miss for me, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me that he didn't work on the movie, but it probably could have been improved by him at least participating in it in some way, since it was his original movie. Next, we have The Grudge, the new one, which we're gonna have a little discussion for a second. Obviously, you can't call the new Grudge that just came out a formal sequel because it technically takes place at the same time as the American Grudge movie. But you also can't call it a reboot because there is none of the original plot or characters or anything in it, so they're not remaking it, and it is technically the same timeline, so it's not a remake in that sense either. And I think that's really a testament to how bad this movie really is, because you can't call it anything. It's not really I'm putting it in a sequel video because that's the best I can do, because the film itself, even as a standalone movie, made no sense. The pacing of the movie, the climax, the ending was so bad, and I think that they tried to do too much with it and tried to make a movie fit into the Grudge universe in some way, and it just flopped so hard. I'm not gonna go too in depth on this movie as a whole though. I don't need to sit here and rip it a new one again because I just recently did a video reviewing it. So if you wanna know more of my thoughts and, you know, me ranting a little bit about it, go check out my video on it. Next up is Jigsaw. Now, generally I'm a fan of anything in the Saw franchise. I will watch every single movie that comes out in theaters. I think that's one thing that these kind of bigger franchises that have lots of movies going for it is that the viewers of them and fans of them are very loyal. We will constantly go see them in theaters, even if they're bad. You know, by now we know what we're signing up for when we watch a Saw movie. You know, we're not in it for the story, we're in it for the gore and the torture scenes and the traps, right? But even Jigsaw was able to disappoint Saw fans, which that's, you know, a feat in itself, because we will take a bad movie. I mean, we all liked most of the franchise anyway. We have our choices of favorites, sure, but most Saw fans were actually very disappointed with Jigsaw, and I think it's because not only was the plot lacking, but the traps and just the gore in general wasn't great. Now, Saw 3D was allegedly supposed to be the last in the franchise, and there were rumors when this franchise was created that there were going to be 10 movies in total. And then Saw 3D came out in 2010 and was said to be the last of them until 2017, and Jigsaw came out. You know, obviously when you've made so many Saw movies, there's going to be changes to each one to keep it interesting. They're not going to reboot it 7 years later and not change things and just make yet another Saw movie. You know, we didn't need like Saw 8 or whatever this one would be. Yeah, I think it would be Saw 8. And although it got terrible ratings, it actually did very well in the box office and financially because, like I said, Saw fans are loyal. I think everyone was excited to see the gruesome traps on the big screen again. And then here we are in 2020 anticipating yet another Saw movie of Spiral, which is actually directed by Chris Rock. So I'm hoping he brings a new perspective to the franchise. It seems like we're just constantly rebooting it, and I feel like we should just let it die because the last good one was decades ago, so we should just let it calm down now. But you know what? I'm open-minded. Like I said, Saw fan, loyal, gonna see it. Anyway, like I mentioned in Cabin Fever, it's not that the original Saw movies are works of art. They're not fantastic. We're not in it for the plot or anything. They are kind of just gore movies, and we watch them for that reason. But I think that the twist at the end of Jigsaw was super, super disappointing and just so unrealistic if you're a fan of the original. It just didn't make sense in the universe, which is why it's one of the worst sequels. Next up, we have The Exorcism of Molly Hartley. Now, if you have been around on my channel for a minute, you know my love for The Haunting of Molly Hartley, right? It's a very cheesy, bad movie. I call it a guilty pleasure, but I genuinely enjoy this movie. I rewatch it so much. I don't know why. If I had to sit here and tell you why I like it so much. And I feel weird putting the sequel on this list because the first movie is generally bad. Like, no one really likes that movie, so of course the sequel wouldn't be good. So if you don't know the general plot of the first movie, Haunting of Molly Hartley, spoiler alert, by the way. Her parents sell her soul to the devil so she can live to be 18, and then on her 18th birthday, the devil comes and takes her away, which really isn't taking her anywhere. She's still able to live her life. She just kind of lives a life of sin, I guess. So the Exorcism sequel follows her later in life as an adult, and it really irritates me that they didn't have the same actress play her, which, you know, it's been done before, but generally that takes me out of it, right? I just don't feel the same thing that I feel for her in the original. It's a different actress, different person. And I get it, people age, but that's not a good reason to have a different actor play her. There are a lot of familiar faces though from Final Destination in the sequel. So in the sequel, she is accused of murder and is being held in a psychiatric hospital and becomes possessed by an evil spirit and has to be exorcised before the demon completely takes over her body. And now, if you remember, I said that her parents sold her soul to Satan earlier, and so she belongs to the devil. How is it then that she is possessed by a demon and is fighting it? Like, she's not part of Satan's world anyway. Like, that doesn't make any sense in the universe of Molly Hartley. And I also really like how the IMDb says in their trivia, this was supposed to be a sequel to The Haunting of Molly Hartley. Like, whoever added that in the trivia, even they were skeptical. Like, I guess this is a sequel. Also, just generally, it's a bad movie with cheesy jump scares and just horrible plot, and I just don't recommend it in the slightest, but do watch The Haunting of Molly Hartley. Next up is Final Destination 4. The Final Destination is what it's called technically, and this is another movie I own on DVD because I insist on owning the entire franchise. But I think this is not an unpopular opinion when I say that this is the least liked sequel in the Final Destination universe. And also, I'm not sure why they felt like calling it The Final Destination when I guess they were anticipating that would be the end, but then they made another one later that ended up being a lot better, and that one should have been The Final Destination, you know what I'm saying? So The Final Destination follows a group of people who survived an accident. In this case, it's at a racetrack, and it is by far the lamest opening sequence of any Final Destination movie. I don't know about you, but the opening sequences to me of the accidents and the premonitions are some of the best scenes in the movie, and I love those scenes. Specifically, the second one scares the poop out of me. That one's horrifying. A racetrack though, I get it. It could be somewhat scary, but how often are we in that situation? Like the one thing that I really appreciate about the other ones is that they're common. You got a plane, you got a car pile up on a freeway, you got a roller coaster, right? A racetrack. Now, one could argue that the entire franchise was overdone. They probably made too many movies. Too many movies, actually, if we're being honest. They could have stopped at 3 and it been like a perfect franchise. But much like Saw, we're not really in it for the plot or the story development. We're pretty much in it for seeing the creative ways that people die. And that's ultimately why they made so many, because they could make so many, because like Saw, we are loyal to the franchise. We will see every single movie that comes out because they're going to be creative inherently, because there's many ways that one could die. Now, this movie was made for 3D, and sometimes that just gets real annoying. I don't know why it is with like early 2000s or early 2010 movies where they were obsessed with 3D movies. So they made some in 3D, Saw had a 3D one. And it's just awkward sometimes to watch them when it's not in 3D. And I just felt like that the death scenes in the 4th Final Destination were like the most lame and just unrealistic, like very unrealistic. Of course, they're all unrealistic because death is an entity that is like, excuse me. Death is an entity that is forcing them into these situations, so naturally you wouldn't accidentally have these situations happen. Also, I think it's saying a lot that this is the first Final Destination, that's really hard to say fast so many times. This is the first Final Destination movie that did not have Tony Todd be a part of it because of scheduling issues, and I think that's just a testament to how this one was kind of cursed and, you know, bad from the get-go. All right, next one pains me to put on this list, but I have to. It is The Last Exorcism Part 2. Now, again, if you know me or been around for a while, you know why this one is special to me. It is the movie I saw on my first date on my birthday with my boyfriend. So it's, you know, it's special to me in that way. I own it because it is special and I like to revisit that. You know, who doesn't like to revisit their first date now and again? And generally, I want to say I don't think it's one of the worst sequels that are on this list. I do enjoy it and I have rewatched it. It's not the worst. But like I said before, following the last Exorcism movie, this is so much worse. First of all, the first movie is genuinely an amazing found footage film, and I put it on my best found footage movies. I will link it if you haven't seen that yet. The second part, The Last Exorcism Part 2, is not in the style of found footage at all, which I don't like how movies do that when you are a found footage movie and then the sequel is not. And I don't understand what that choice was. Well, I do understand because the plot of the second one could not have been really done found footage style. It wouldn't have made sense. But then don't make it at all, you know? Like just, it wasn't necessary. I don't hate the movie by any means, but as a sequel, it's not great and it just doesn't feel like it was needed. I do appreciate they kept Ashley Bell as the lead in the movie, you know, same actor. You know, I like that continuity, so that helps. But overall, it just couldn't live up to the first one and just wasn't needed to conclude the story. So the next sequel is actually my favorite sequel on this list. Not my favorite sequel obviously ever made. That's for best sequels. This is a worst sequel list, but it is my favorite sequel out of the worst ones. Does that even matter? Should I even say that? Silent Hill Revelation. So the original is obviously amazing for its use of a lot of practical effects in combination with CGI to create the nightmarish monsters that are in the game. And I think the sequel used primarily CGI, which is probably one of the biggest downfalls for me, and I just didn't find the monsters in the sequel as terrifying or as like creative and interesting as the first one. And obviously this franchise is based off of the game franchise, which I've never really played the games, but I have heard that it is loosely inspired by the games. So I imagine that the first movie is a little bit more accurate, and I've heard that the second movie is definitely very loosely inspired by the story in the games, and I don't even think that the monsters are accurate to the games. Now, the sequel follows Sharon years later after her adopted father disappears and she finds herself being haunted by Silent Hill once again. And I understand the plot, which is kind of why I like it. I like the continuation of Sharon's story as a teen, like later in life. And it's definitely would be considered kind of a guilty pleasure movie, but I do genuinely enjoy it and have rewatched it. So, but it's definitely not a good sequel to the first movie. So since we talked about the worst movies from the Saw and Final Destination franchises, let's talk about another 2000s franchise and its worst sequel, Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension. Thank you. Now, at the end of Paranormal Activity, we obviously got a lot of redundancy in the scares and everything. I mean, there were 6 total made, so of course they had to like mix it up and keep it creative and not just, you know, keep doing the same scares over and over again. So naturally, they all kind of dropped in quality as they went on, except for Paranormal Activity 2, which is actually my favorite of the whole franchise. Sorry about my cat. So the Ghost Dimension was particularly cliched, I think, and used all CGI for all the scares. And I think it lost its simplicity in the process of filming, and I feel like they tried to achieve too much with this movie. And I think that's what makes the first, like, 3 to 4 Paranormal Activities so successful, is because of the simplicity in building the tension, and we feel the horror elements without actually seeing much in them. If you enjoy supernatural horror, that is, of course. If it's not your favorite genre, they're probably not that effective for you. So the Ghost Dimension is actually the lowest rated out of the whole franchise, including on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. So across pretty much all critics, they all agree that this is the worst of the franchise. It also made the least amount of money in the entire franchise. And this movie is technically a direct sequel to the 4th movie, but takes place after the events from the 3rd movie. Also, there are rumors that a 7th Paranormal Activity movie is in the making and is to be released next year. All right, guys, this is the last bad sequel of the video. Are you distracted? So in coming up with this list, I wanted to put this on there, but it feels weird putting this movie on this list, and you'll see why. The Human Centipede 3. I know. I will argue that all of these movies are pretty terrible and made for shock value only. Like, I don't know really who sits down to watch any of the Human Centipede movies to like enjoy them. And the 3rd is by far the worst out of the whole series. I mean, they're all just really kind of bad. I don't know. Is it just me? I'm sure there are people out there who do like it as like a series, but the 3rd one is objectively bad, I think, because just hearing about the plot and the description of the plot is so ridiculous that I just want to like roll my eyes. I do want to point out that I did a react video to this movie with my old roommate. He's just vibing, he's chilling. I did a react video with my old roommate to this movie like 4 years ago. So if you want to see my genuine reaction to this movie, I will link that video, but it is very old and just, I don't recommend watching it, actually. I'm not going to link it. So this movie follows a prison warden who is inspired by the original Human Centipede films and decides to connect 500 inmates as a punishment. Now, I understand that these movies are generally made for shock value, obviously, and are satire in their own way, because the concept is just so ridiculous, and it's like one of those that you put on to shock other people, like if you're with friends and things, and it's just one of those that are like highly talked about because it's such a bizarre concept. And it's like funny. It's a funny concept, although highly disturbing. Oh my god. We're cuddling now. No? Okay. You know, I could also argue that the first 2 films are at least creative and disturbing. Like, they genuinely get to me as a disturbing film, because although the concept is so ridiculous and like funny, it's when you actually sit down to watch them, they are actually horrifying and disturbing. The 3rd one, though, just loses that creativity, I think, and just becomes obnoxious. Speaking of obnoxious, can you not? It was made as a fan service, I think, because after 12 people, how many people can you connect? Let's do 500. That just scientifically doesn't make any sense. You lose the disturbing aspect of it because it's so over the top. The concept is still there of like the disturbing nature of connecting people through the intestinal tract, obviously. But the movie is made in such a satirical tone that it takes away any like horror element of it, and I think it's just made for people to cringe at. I don't think it's generally meant to be entertaining. Well, I guess that is somewhat entertaining for some people, but it's not meant to be like a serious movie with like a good developed story and plot and things like that. But I do want to say rest in peace to Dieter, is that how you pronounce his name? Dieter Laser, who has recently passed away. So that is my list of the absolute worst sequels made that I've seen anyway. I haven't seen some, like Book of Shadows from Blair Witch. I never saw it. It's on my list though to watch in quarantine, so I'll give you guys an update when I do. But please feel free to leave a comment of your worst sequels or the sequels that disappointed you the most, and just leave a comment of sequels that you recommend from your favorite franchises or just any kind of movie that you thought did really well with their sequels. Leave that down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.